All right, class, settle in. We are about to take a journey back in time to a misty, foundational period in English history. We're talking about an age of heroes and monsters, of clashing swords and, more importantly, colliding worlds. This is the story of how the very soul of a people was forged.
Wait, listen, that's how it begins. So, the Spear Danes in days gone by and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. These are the very first words of Beowulf, maybe the most important epic poem in the entire English language. Just listen to the sound of it, the rhythm. This isn't just a story, it's a song, you know? It's meant to be performed in a smoky mead hall, and somehow it's reaching out to us across more than 1,000 years.
Now, it might look completely alien, I get it, but this language, it's the bedrock of the words you and I are using right now. It was spoken by the Germanic tribes who came to Britain, the ones who laid the foundation for what would become England. And their world was harsh, you know? Their lives were often brutally short. In a world like that, stories were everything. They were the only shot you had at being remembered.
And that brings us to the central mystery we're going to unpack. How does a culture built on vengeance and personal glory become one that values forgiveness and humility? Well, this isn't a simple story of replacement, of one belief system just wiping out another. No, it's a story of a brilliant, creative, and sometimes messy fusion. And to really get it, we first have to understand the world that came before.
So let's set the stage. The pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon world ran on a very specific, very powerful set of values. We call it the Germanic heroic code.
See, in a world without a guaranteed heavenly afterlife, your reputation was the only thing that survived you. That pursuit of earthly fame, a concept they called lof, was the absolute driving force. And how did you get it? Through total loyalty to your Lord and unblinking courage, especially in the face of death. Your story, sung by the bards, the scops in the mead hall, well, that was your ticket to immortality.
And looming over all of this was the concept of wired. That's W-Y-R-D. Fate. This wasn't a god you could pray to for a better outcome, it was just this indifferent, unchangeable force. The heroic ideal was to stare your destiny right in the face, whatever it was, with stoic courage. Because, as the saying went, fate spares the man it has not already marked.
And this is where we get this incredible collision of ideas. When Christian missionaries started showing up, they weren't just bringing a new god, they were bringing a completely different operating system for society. Forgiveness instead of vengeance, humility over the quest for fame, a loving God's plan instead of a cold, indifferent fate. These ideas were a direct challenge to the very core of what it meant to be a warrior.
So how do you bridge a gap that wide? How do you make the new make sense to the old? Well, the first steps weren't taken by some king or a great theologian. Nope. They were taken by a figure you would least expect, an illiterate cowherd. His story is the very beginning of this incredible cultural remix.
Let me introduce you to Caedmon. The story goes that he was a humble worker at an abbey, and he was so shy about his singing voice, or lack thereof, that he'd leave parties when it was his turn to sing. But one night, he has this dream where a divine figure commands him to sing about the creation, and he wakes up a poet, the very first English poet that we know by name.
And this is where the genius comes in. Caedmon didn't invent some brand new style of poetry. He took the existing form, the alliterative verse, the epic language of the pagan scops who sang about heroes and battles, and he just aimed it at a new target. This was a profound act of cultural translation, making this foreign, new faith feel familiar and powerful.
I mean, just look at the language here. God isn't just God, he's the guardian of the heaven kingdom. That sounds a lot like a king protecting his hall, right? He's the glory father, the ultimate chieftain. For an Anglo-Saxon warrior used to hearing songs of praise for his lord, this language was immediately understandable. It clicked.
So if Caedmon kind of opened the door, other poets came along and just kicked it wide open. The next step in this cultural remix was even more radical. It involved reimagining the central figure of Christianity in a way that would speak directly to the warrior class.
The poem, The Dream of the Rood, is an absolute masterpiece of this blending. It's a vision, but here's the twist. It's told from the perspective of the cross itself. And it doesn't describe a scene of passive suffering. Oh no, it describes a battle.
This is just a stunning reimagining. Think about it. Christ isn't a victim here. He is a young hero, strong and stout-minded. He strips himself like a warrior getting ready for combat. He mounts the cross, actively, boldly.
This was not the turn-the-other-cheek Christ. This was a Christ who met his fate with the courage of a Germanic warrior. It was a brilliant reframing.
So what the poem does is it basically reskins the entire narrative. The cross becomes a loyal follower, a Thane who's devastated because it has to take part in the death of its beloved Lord. The crucifixion itself is a great struggle. And in this new light, things like submission and martyrdom, which might have looked like weakness to a warrior, are transformed into the ultimate acts of heroic glory.
Okay, so all of this cultural blending, all these tensions and new harmonies, they reach their absolute peak in the great epic that we started with, Beowulf. This is where the pagan and Christian worldviews don't just coexist, they are fused together inside a single, unforgettable character. So real quick, the plot is basically 3 epic fights. As a young warrior, he takes on the monster Grendel. Then he has to seek vengeance against Grendel's mother in her underwater lair. And finally, 50 years later, now an old king, he faces a dragon in a battle that will cost him his life but save his people.
And through it all, Beowulf himself is a total paradox. He is the perfect pagan hero. He's obsessed with his reputation, he boasts about his strength, he wants treasure and fame. But at the very same time, the Christian poet telling the story frames him as a savior, as an agent of God sent to defeat the forces of evil.
You can actually see this conflict in his own words. One minute, he's talking about his trust in the old pagan concept of weird, of fate. But then, after a really close call, he says flat out that it was the Christian God who saved him. He's living with a foot in both worlds, and what's amazing is that the poet never seems to think this is a contradiction that needs fixing. For him, they could both be true.
And you see the split in every part of his character. On one hand, he's absolutely driven by that pagan code, fame, vengeance, pride. But on the other hand, he acts like a true Christian champion. He fights monsters described as descendants of Cain. He sacrifices himself for his people, and he gives the credit for his victories to a higher power. He is the synthesis.
The poem's 3,182 lines are just this incredible testament to how deeply these two worldviews got woven together. Beowulf is not a simple story. It's this dense, complex tapestry, and it reflects a culture caught right in the middle of a profound transformation.
So, what's the big takeaway here? What does this journey through ancient poetry really tell us? Well, it reveals the fascinating, messy, and deeply creative process of how a culture remakes itself.
The real genius of this literature is that it wasn't a conquest, it was a conversation. The old heroic voices were never silenced. Their echoes were woven into the new songs of faith. They created something brand new, a uniquely English cultural DNA, where the fierce courage of the warrior could coexist with the merciful heart of the saint.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? This process of blending the old with the new to create meaning, it never really stops. So what are the pagan codes and new faiths of our time? What stories are we remixing right now to try and forge the identity of the future?